Hey everybody, welcome to the episode of the LitRPG Podcast. I'm Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course, author interviews. Episode number 150 of the show. Thank you very much for hanging out with us for 150 episodes. Hope that we have many more for you in the near future. In the future, of course. This week I have 7 new LitRPG reviews just for you folks at home, and that includes the titles of Gathering Strength, Character Development, book number 2, written by Aaron J. We actually had a nice author interview on the podcast. We did a live Facebook stream, Facebook live stream with him here, actually in the house, where I record. We talked live, we talked to people on there and chatted. It was a really nice thing. We also recorded a spoiler-full author interview with him, which won't be broadcast on the podcast for about a month or so. In that particular podcast, we talked about all the plot details, a bunch of other author workshop stuff, and also just real influences and the things he may plan to do in the future. But they're chock full of spoilers, which is again why I'm warning you now. In about a month, at the beginning of February, we'll release that for you folks. So if you've already read books 1 and 2 in the series, you'll enjoy that. But I'll be reviewing book 2 today on the podcast, let you know what I think about that. Also, we're reviewing as well Finding a Body, the Dark Herbalist book number 4, LitRPG series. After that, it'll be it's yet another OP story, book number 1. And no, it's I Am Gamer. Sorry, next one is I Am Gamer number 2. Then it is yet another OP story, story number 1. After that, it'll be Rexus Side Quest, The Completionist Chronicles, book number 3. Then it'll be Break, EvoBorne, book number 1. And last, it'll be Worlds Unbound, an Apocalyptic LitRPG. That's the System Apocalyptic book number 6 in that series. So again, 7 new LitRPG titles that we're reviewing for you on the show today. But of course, before we do that, we're going to go into LitRPG news. And our first story in LitRPG news is going to be from Charles Dean. Charles Dean recently released some artwork that he had commissioned for the character Jade in his War Eternus series. And it is it's very nice. It is. I actually liked the theme. I like the colors that match her hair, the blue. And I super love the blood-based weapon system that's in that series, and is definitely highlighted here. The anatomy seems a little weird if you think about it on the particular pose, but hey, it's art. It's open interpretation. But we'll link in the show notes if you want to check that out. But it's very, very nice, and I encourage more authors to do commission work for their art, for their just side art projects, fun stuff to give away to fans or to Patreon supporters. Also in LitRPG news, we have Matt Dinneman. He's actually updated the cover art for his first book in the Dominion of Blade series. The new art is a bit more action oriented and fits the cover art style for the rest of the series, how that ended up. Personally, I kind of like the ambiguity of the cover art Matt originally made. In the video version of the podcast, we'll actually see 2 different covers side by side. The new one is on the left. The older version is on the right. I genuinely liked the old version better just because it has such an interesting color scheme. It's very artistic, and Matt Dinneman actually is an artist, like an artist in his own right, where he makes artwork and people buy it from him. And I think this one is it's very unique, original cover art. But again, the book cover on the left, which is the new one, is not bad, and it does again fit with the other cover art that he's had for the series. So I get it. But there you go. That's it. All the news we have. Sorry, I probably should have included the author interview with Aaron J in this section as well, but I'm like, oh wait, I couldn't wait to talk about it. So there we go. Out now, we have some stuff that came up this week. Haven't had a chance to read. It's the new year, folks. Only 2 titles though, as far as ebooks go. We have The Stellar Rebellion, a futuristic dungeon core. It's the Laboratory series. That's the Laboratory book number 9 by Skylar Grant. So it's a futuristic dungeon core series. That's one I usually think of. Book 9 in that series. I haven't read, I think I stopped reading about book 6. But for folks who are still into that series, who are enjoying it, it is out now. Go check it out. Also out now, this is the last book in the series. It's called Glitch Book 6, the 6th book in the Glitch series. Who would have guessed? And the author said in the original posting that it's the last book in that particular. So if you've been following that short story series, that is out as well. I stopped after about book 3. But if you're a fan, if you're enjoying it, just because I don't read it, just doesn't mean folks aren't liking it. So letting you know that it is out. Okay, new LitRPG audiobooks. There's actually more new LitRPG audiobooks than there are in the out now section, to be honest. Like there's a good number of authors I think who are trying to get their audiobooks out before the end of the year, and they missed, or just maybe Audible just including them. They're all coming out at the beginning of this year, of 2019. So here they are coming up, including Fragments, Somnia Online book number 3. We also have Myths and Legends, Amarillia book number 9 as an audiobook. We have Dan the Barbarian coming out as an audiobook, book number 1. Advent Red Mage book number 1. That's the one of the first titles released by Mountain Dale Press. It is out as an audiobook now. They actually got Luke Daniels to narrate that, so good job for you guys. That's very nice. Good narrator. But that is out currently, as is Creatures and Caverns book number 6, the Critical Seller series, book number 6 in that series, called The Good, the Bad, and the Neutral. It's out as an audiobook. So folks who love that series, that super funny potty humor filled cursing series, it's out as an audiobook. Also out is Neverfall, Mark of the Hero. And as is, last but not least, of course, Accidental Dragoon, the Accidental Champion series, book number 3. Is out as an audiobook as well. So there we go. On to upcoming LitRPG. This is where I read a bunch of stuff that's coming out in the near future. And it's happy to see that it's populating a little bit more as people are putting up pre-orders. The closest is going to be on January the 9th for the Level Up series. This is a different series by the same author and a different co-author. But it is a different main character from the Level Up series. But the first book in that series is coming on January the 9th. Out on January the 11th, it'll be Jeffrey Logue's Dungeon Wars. So it's a new arc. It's a new kind of series from that same dungeon master story thing, dungeon core story. Out on January the 14th, it'll be Bitter, book number 5. Out on January 19th, it'll be The Steelhounds, the Artar Chronicles. This is a translated work. On January 23rd, another translated work. It'll be called Volper Al Forame, book number 1. It's definitely a translated work. On January the 29th, it'll be Neverfall Catacombs book number 2. Then it'll be on January the 30th, The Hope Engine. So that's actually a title I believe has been over a road for a while, and it is coming to Amazon on January the 30th. Out on February the 14th, it'll be the 4th book in the Good Guide series called For the Loot. Get it? For the Loot. It's a really fun series. Actually, I definitely recommend you read up on books number 1 through 3, but it'll be out on February the 14th. February the 24th, it is Collide EvoBorne book number 2. We're reviewing book number 1 on the podcast actually today, but book 2 will be out on February the 24th. On February the 26th, it'll be another translated work. It looks like we're actually going to get a lot of new translated stuff from like Russia and the Ukraine, from LitRPG authors there who have existing series and are translating them over. And so we have another translated work coming out on February the 26th called Cat's Game, book number 1. So there we go. Out on March the 25th is the last book in the Level Up series, the one that we've been enjoying the last few months. It'll be out on March 25th. It's called The Final Trial. So again, lots of translated stuff coming out this year. Apparently they've heard those American markets. It's really nice. So there we go. And that's all the stuff that's coming out in the near future. On to new releases and reviews. And in new releases and reviews, we're going to begin with Gathering Strength, character development book number 2, written by Aaron J. This is 332 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the author's description. Miles Boone is running out of time. He had 1 year to solve every beginner quest the game offers, or he faces a lifetime of slavery. Now, time is flying by and he can't even find a safe place to play the game. His apartment is burned down while he was in it. His secretive father won't let him enter the game from his home. Miles' only choice is to enter the underbelly of society and try to win his bet from an anonymous VR pod controlled by an old associate, or is that an enemy of his father's? Meanwhile, the party's hunt for him in-game continues. Surrounded by enemies from within and without, Miles has to keep upping the game. His lack of luck set makes it impossible for him to play like anyone else, and with no luck, Miles will have to gather the strength to survive. So there we go. That is the author's description, and it's pretty accurate because it's all the big points. There's a lot of other stuff in there as well, of course. Now, the second novel in the character development series, it's here. A lot of people will probably remember this more as the Beginner's Luck series, because that's the name of the first book, but it is actually technically called the character development series, so be aware of that. And a lot of people really like the first book. They genuinely did. Ever since it came out about a year ago, the author has been asked again and again, when's book 2 coming out? And here it is, folks. So here we go. You got what you wanted, and go enjoy it. Some of the nicer elements of like this series as a whole is that there are nice sci-fi elements that kind of give consequence to what happened in the RPG world. And this is one of those cases where I think the real world storyline is as interesting as the game storyline. And the two do have consequences for the show. Like if the main character fails in the game world, he's kind of screwed in real life. And there's an actual application that the game has for real life. And that's something that I should talk about in the spoilery author interview that I did with the author recently, which won't be coming out for a little while. But that's one of the things I think people really enjoyed about the series, and it does continue to a degree in book 2. There is less of the things that I think a lot of people complained about in the reviews for book 1, including like there's less political rhetoric. That has been toned down. It's intent kind of replaced with this commentary about how entertainment, and especially full immersion virtual reality systems, could be like the ultimate drug of the far future. So there is still interesting, thought-provoking themes in this story that is so very interesting. And one of the things personally that I liked about the series in book 1 and book 2 is that the author uses fiction to kind of make people think and to contemplate it, and it's speculative fiction in some way, and to create a conversation and a thought process. And there are definitely still points in book 2 that are different than book 1 that are going to make you maybe pause and say, oh, that's an interesting, I never thought about that, I wonder where that kind of goes kind of stuff. But it's still, that's in addition to the enjoyable narrative. Story-wise, I'd say this one is a little less engaging than book 1. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that book 1 was fresh. It was everything new. And this one, I think, has a little bit of pacing problems in some areas. It starts off really well with a nice recap of the events of the previous book. And then it gets into the action in game very quickly. So you're not spending a lot of time trying to rehash things. It's like the main character is telling you as he's doing stuff. Things just kind of slow down a little bit for me, like mid-story, and nothing really advances the big plot line in that section for me. There's a lot of like little side adventures with the main characters either grinding stuff or trying to figure out ways to advance the second beginner quest that he's trying to complete. But it was a little slow for me in some places, and it felt a little like wandering. And I'm like, it is what it is. It's not bad. It's necessarily because there are some good action scenes, there are good development scenes, there are good training scenes in that section as well. It's just that as far as advancing the plot, it's like, oh, where is this going? Was something I asked myself about midway through the story. And again, it does advance the story eventually. It just kind of wanders about a bit before it gets there and figures it out. The fights in the story range from like okay to really good, actually. Some of the fights feel again a little bit flat. They're a little more grindy in that you don't understand why the main character is necessarily doing them, but they're not bad in any way, shape, or form. There are some really good fights though. Like there were genuinely like one fight in particular involving the prairie dog creatures in the story it's a really good fight. Like it's a really highlight of the story. The main character does intelligent thinking. He uses his gamer skills and his knowledge to kind of game the system. Like, oh, that was just genuinely a good fight, and it's almost worth the price of admission just to get that particular. And I only wish that more of the fights were like that, because that was like a real highlight of the story. I think there were other reviews for the novel already in book 2 that kind of mentioned the same. Like this is a nice fight. Game mechanic wise, things are still really good. If you like the game mechanics of book 1, they're all carrying through into book 2. The author does a really good job of keeping the RPG mechanic consistent, interesting, and detailed. This story could honestly stand a kind of a recap of some of the magical elements, because it has been a year since book 1. I think the author is kind of assuming that you've recently read it in some respect, as far as like the magical components, because I had to remind myself, oh yeah, that's right. He does magic a special way because he's has 0 luck and he is on hardcore mode. And so that's affecting how he can do his magic system. I probably would have enjoyed like a little bit of a recap just to remind the reader like the limitations of that particular game mechanic system. Let's see. So there's lots of good training stuff in here. I just wish there was probably a little bit more sooner in this. Like the training stuff, I think is probably one of the more underutilized aspects of this game world and this kind of story narrative because it's the only place where time compression occurs in this game universe. Everything else in game is 1-to-1 ratio with the regular world. So if he spends an hour in the game, it's an hour in real life, with the exception of training. And there, time can be compressed, and I just don't think it's utilized enough, especially considering the way the main character has to progress in this story. And I don't want to spoil it for you, but training would really help in some of the respects. Personal thought, of course. Overall, this is a good second book. There were some minor pacing issues again. The novel says really good action, adventure, sets up some interesting stuff for book 3, I think, that a lot of people are going to enjoy. And for me, I had a good time with it. Gets a score of 7.4 to 10. That's Gathering Strength, Character Development, book number 2, with a score of 7.4 out of 10. There you go. Okay, next review is for Finding a Body, the Dark Herbalist, book number 4 by Michael Antonoff. It is the last book in that series, according to the author. It is 499 pages, $6.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited, folks. Sorry. Here's the author's description. What is it like for a small, flap-eared goblin herbalist to play the role of the Dark Sovereign? The main antagonist for Boundless Realms, hundreds of millions of players. What is it like to find oneself standard bearer for an army of man-eating giants, cyclopses, skeletons, ghosts, and other hellspawn who don't give a damn about their modest little ruler? Our hero didn't desire such an unenviable fate, but there is no way back now. He'll just have to tighten the straps and play the ghastly overlord to the innumerable hordes that now threaten all of the Boundless Realm. But the longer our hero plays, the better he understands that this world is much more complicated than it seems at first glance, and he is just a pawn in someone else's game. And lots of things depend on whether he can figure out all of it in the short time he has left, including his life. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, that's not in there. I did that. But it seems like it fits. Okay, this is the final novel in the Dark Herbalist series. Again, the author says he might return to this at sometime in the future, but for now, this series has been finished for a while, I believe, in Russia. So it's just being translated now. It's the last book in the series, and he's moving on to other projects, including some LitRPG stories. As with any final story, the author goes through great lengths to kind of try and tie up all the major and minor storylines from the series. And to be honest, the author, I think, does a pretty good job in tying up those major plot lines. The minor ones feel a little bit rushed, though. The major plot lines are resolved in a rather epic fashion, both in-game and in real life, and there are several interesting twists I was genuinely surprised by, so good stuff there. There are some kingdom building elements added to the game world, and some pretty epic fights as the main character's new in-game kingdom is attacked from all sides. The plan the main character enacts to counter the many factions trying to beat him are very smart, and they're very well thought out. Really good stuff on that end. Again, however, some of the smaller parts of the story, they feel rushed to get them resolved. And it could be the case that I just felt like this is it. This is the final one. And he has to tie them, and that's very admirable to do. Several minor plot arcs, again, are just resolved in a couple sentences, and the end is honestly not as epically satisfying as you'd think it would be with all the buildup that leads to it. But mind you, these are kind of minor complaints. It doesn't take away from me, at least, how enjoyable this is for finishing it in this series as a whole. These are just minor thoughts. My big complaint basically is I would have liked more story. And I think that's a really good complaint to have for a series you're enjoying, is that I wish there was more. I wish I could have spent another couple hours, another couple books in this series, but that's not the case. It's done, and that's sad. But it is the end of the series that does a really good job of completing it off. And again, outside those small little completing things, this was really super enjoyable. I had a good time with it. Gets a score of 7.8 out of 10. Finding a Body, the Dark Herbalist, book number 4. If you're a fan of the series, this is something you probably already picked up, but if you haven't, please go do so. It's definitely worth the price tag for me, just to get a good resolution on the series and see, okay, this is how the story ends. And it gets a bunch of cameos from other people in the series. So if you liked all those people, they come back in one shape or form or the other mostly. So again, that's Finding a Body, the Dark Herbalist, book number 4, with a score of 7.8 out of 10. Okay, next, I Am Gamer, book number 2. Although the title looks like it says, I Am Gamer, it is number 2. It is 355 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. It's super short. Lawrence was having a shitty day after he found out his girlfriend and best friend were cheating on him together. Then a legendary Native American god, Coyote to be exact, sent him back in time to the 1400s North America. Now he's living in the past, kicking ass and taking names. Rejoin Moonflower, Freak, and the rest of the crew as they save history by rewriting it. And that is accurate. Does not describe where the plot's going in any shape or form. That feels like it's kind of an expansion on just like a little added to the novel description for book 1, but it is technically accurate. I should warn you in advance. I found probably more than any other story I think I've read from the author. This one has like some very regular errors. And they're not like necessarily bad spelling errors or like misplaced things or technical writing on the most part, but there's like a lot of little mistakes, like missing words or using like the wrong word, like spell check didn't catch it because it's technically a correct word, it's not in that sentence. For example, like using the word life instead of lift, using the word work instead of word, things like that. It didn't really bother me that very much, but looking at some of the reviews, it bothered some other people a little bit, and I know that it is going to bug some people because it's pretty semi-regular. It comes out to about I'd say 1 or 2 of these little mistakes every 3 or 4 pages. So like I said, if it bothers you, it does. This story is an interesting combination of LitRPG and alternative history. There's some really great first act story here where the main character deals with the newly arrived conquistadors, which is like the big plot point for book number 1, spoilery, where they were trying to prepare for that. And like there's really good action there. There's good character, man. There's good community and team building there that I thought was like really, really nice. Afterwards, the rest of the story is mostly just slice of life, adventuring, questing, crafting, backstorytelling, and some smaller fights. The story loses me a little bit, mostly because it just feels like it's becoming less focused with these multiple narrations, because the group kind of splits up, and so you have a bunch of little stories, and some nice backstory stories for new characters that are introduced, but those at the same time those scenes are completely devoid of LitRPG stuff, and so they feel a little bit like, oh, they're nice little short stories that don't necessarily count as LitRPG. And so for me, I wasn't really super interested in them, even though they're nice stories. Overall, it's still a very interesting story. There's some unique time and history elements. The focus of the story seems to have shifted a little bit from just like the conquistador aspect of like rewriting history to bringing in some other deities and champions and some other tournament stuff. I think that's really good for the series as a whole, because you bring in more historical aspects, but it does kind of shift the tone of the story a little bit. For me, one of the funnier things I liked in the story that I liked, and I thought it was kind of neat, with the citations to Wikipedia in the novel for the historical references. I thought they were really funny in that they existed at all, because most fiction writers don't use footnotes, or they don't use like in parentheses, for more information, check out this Wikipedia page. I just thought it was super funny, because I felt like the author was saying, like he had to prove to readers, yeah, this stuff is not made up. This stuff really happened. These are terrible events in history that actually occurred. If you don't believe me, here's a wiki page. And that's, I think for me, I like history, so I like those references. I just thought it was funny. This story, of course, still has a soundtrack. So if you like that aspect of the author's writing, which he's kind of, brought through all this stuff, there is a soundtrack available for you to listen to as you read this story, which you can find when you purchase it or get it on Kindle Unlimited. But for me, I had a good time with it. I just didn't have quite as good a time as I did in book 1. But again, it's still enjoyable. For me, it gets a score of 7.2 out of 10. That's I Am Gamer, book number 2, with a score of 7.2 out of 10. Okay. On to our next review. It's going to be YAOS 1, Limitless Adventures, or yet another OP story, book number 1. It is written by Magnus Lute. Okay. It is 424 pages, $6.78. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Shaping the fabric of reality, magic that drew our genius athlete protagonist into this latest craze, a hyper-realistic VR game. Final immersion online. Stable at level 10, he earns a shot at learning magic, feel alive again after being broken by past events. That's what it says, folks. An OP harpy, a god king's daughter, godly doors, a dungeon, and slimes out of adamantium, crafted items beyond reason. Your willingness to suspend disbelief will be challenged in this wild, fast-paced ride crafted to be rereadable, offering a new Game Plus experience with nameless and raceless NPCs you can shape. within the limits of his backstory. Edited throughout 2 busy years, over 69 fully colored, concise stated setups, a world by rules everybody has to follow. Yet rules are meant to be broken. YAOS tells the story of a rule breaking, exceeding common sense, an hypothesis of sorts. What if it's just not another game? And also warns that there are allusions to smut, which aren't graphic in nature. Please feel free to sample the beginning of this book. And he gives an address, of course. This is a challenging story, I'll be honest. I ended up let me see, what did I give a score? I ended up kind of being bored with it, honestly. It is a slice of life LitRPG story set in an MMO with an overpowered main character. That is true. It absolutely is. There are several writing decisions that the author made in the story that are definitely going to annoy some readers. And I was one of them. And that's really rare for me. The story is set in past tense, it's written in past tense rather, but it switches between first and third person perspectives. And sometimes it happens mid paragraph. Like you'll have the same, it'll start at first person, then it'll suddenly shift to third person for some reason, and then it'll shift back, or it'll switch between paragraphs. So there'll be long sections, first person, then suddenly for another like page or two, third person. And it really bothered me. Pick one. Like really, that like I said, it bothered me. Dialogue is also not formatted like you'd expect with dialogue tags, like saying like, oh, he said, comma, and the dialogue is in quotation marks. Instead, dialogue is formatted like it's in a play, where it's like, oh, the boy, and then colon, and the dialogue, and then like the girl, colon, and then the dialogue. And in addition to that, there were just like very few descriptive details from the characters and locations, which made the story feel kind of empty to me. And while the author warns that there are some places where the main character has sex, this is true. It's not graphic. It's really just a sentence saying he had sex, and that's it. There's nothing. It doesn't really matter to the story at all. And the story would probably be better if you just omitted that sentence. Because it doesn't make contextual sense to the story why suddenly, these ladies want to have sex with the main character. And even though it's like literally just like, oh, and they did it. So on the game mechanic side, this is probably the best aspect of the story. And that the game mechanics are detailed. They really are. You see the main character's character sheet very regularly. There are lots of notifications, skills, and item descriptions, loads of leveling. This is absolutely LitRPG. There's no question about that. But there are issues with this too. And in the one that there's a lot of information here, and some people are going to find it overly informative. Also, the tables that the main character, the author uses, they use multiple colors or multiple shades of gray, depending on obviously the device you're using, and it makes it really hard to read. So I think there's just a formatting issue that doesn't quite translate into the ebook or on the Amazon version very well. So it's unfortunate, but there is like the regular character sheets on a regular basis with a bunch of information, probably a little bit too much. And at some point, even the author, he writes in this novel is like, okay, from here on in, I'm just not showing you everything anymore. This is annoying. I'm just going to show you updates of like major points in like the magic or skill system. So even him at some point, he'd realize, oh, this is kind of a lot. So that tells you something. Still, even the main character is overpowered. He actually does a really good attempt of like trying to ground that overpoweredness within math and reasonable-ish overpowered game mechanics. So the game mechanics side of things, I think that's why I think there's a lot of detail and give the author credit for doing that. Unfortunately, the story ruins it all. Like the story is not horrible. It is. It's not getting a bad score. It just didn't work for me. And even if you have really good game mechanics, if your story isn't good, if it's not entertaining, it doesn't matter. Otherwise, you've just given me a bunch of like good numbers and formulas and stuff, and that's perfectly fine. It's just that the story didn't work for me. The beginning of the story is just way too long. It was a huge whine fest of like why the main character's life sucks and how amazing he was, but things went bad for him, and this is his chance to get better. And it's like it took way too long to get to the game. The premise is also a little bit flawed. And the main character is supposed to have like OP abilities because in real life, he's a genius and he's also a super powerful, athletic, person, and he knows martial arts, before getting into the game. And that's why he's overpowered inside the game, except when you scan into the game, his body's broken. So that doesn't really translate well if the computer is just scanning his current body, which is completely broken. I can probably get the genius portion of it. But even then, I could kind of overlook that if the story was interesting, like a bad premise or like not a super amazing premise. It could kind of be overlooked if like the rest of the story is great. And this isn't, and that's unfortunate. Besides a few small adventures, it's mostly just not entertaining. It's mostly slice of life. There's no real plot. The main character just kind of does stuff in the story. And he's trying to figure out how to gain power without learning magic, or to learn magic rather, before he's level 11, because for some reason he gets kicked out at level 11. That's not really explained, unfortunately. And then it kind of transitions at one point to a magical academy story, and it loses a lot of the RPG stuff because it's just about learning magic in this magical academy setting. And then once it returns after that section, it returns back to like the regular slice of life, just doing stuff. And there are other aspects like player versus player combat, some kingdom building stuff. But again, all this is just not really interesting because the main character is always winning. He's always overpowered. And as there's very just little character development, I was never really given a reason to care about the main character in the first place, or in the story, like to be interested in his development. So even though he's an overpowered character, and that can be a fun little premise story to work with, it just wasn't done well here. And that's what it comes down to. I was basically bored for most of the story. And again, not everything about this is bad or anything to form. There's some nice little mini stories. The writing improves the deeper you get into the story a little bit. But fundamentally, again, I just didn't care. I didn't care about the main character. I didn't care what he did. And I was never really given a reason to invest in him. And that's one of the harder challenges of writing an overpowered main character story, is like giving the reader a reason to care. Because it's not because he's having this huge power growth or this power curve where he's like fighting harder and martial, he's working really hard to do it. No, he's overpowered. And it's a challenging, kind of narrative structure to write, because you have to find other reasons for the main character to progress as a character, because it's not going to be combat usually. And that's not the case here. So for me, it gets a score of 5 out of 10. That's Limitless Adventures, yet another OP story, book number 1, with a score of 5 out of 10. There we go. Okay, next, it's going to be Rexus, Side Quest, The Completionist Chronicles, book number 3, written by Dakota Crout. It is 169 pages, probably one of the smallest stories I've seen the author write. It is $3.99 though. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. A side quest in Dakota Crout's best-selling Completionist Chronicles. Vengeful assassins, a treacherous companion, T-Rex headhand. After the Wolfman Nation is shattered, Jackson has enough spare time to advance his skills and specialize into a better class. Since Joe and his other teammates are either incapacitated or on a mission Jackson does not believe in, the misunderstood chiropractor turned gamer strikes out on his own. The issue with creating your own path is that you have no idea what awaits you, especially when low charisma guarantees legendary misunderstandings. For Jackson, that's half the fun. Rexus is a Completionist Chronicles side story focused on Jackson. It's meant to be read following Regicide. There we go. And that's all very accurate. I don't think it does justice to the level of hilarity that's actually in the story, though. This is probably the funniest thing that I've ever read from the author, and it genuinely made me laugh many times out loud. It is a side story, so you don't have to worry about like ruining the story. It's very much outside of the main plot arc for the Completionist Chronicles structure. It's a different main character. It's Jackson, who's a side character in the main series. He's the monk who's also a chiropractor in the story. This is his like side adventure. And it incorporates so many puns, so many awkward situations, humorous banter. It's really just a must read if you like the series and you want to laugh, because you're going to laugh when you read this. Getting to see Jackson's point of view of the game world that's filtered through his amazing low charisma is worth the price alone. Like that aspect of it was always mentioned sort of in like how he behaved in the main story of the Completionist Chronicles, but here you get to see it through his point of view, and you get to see, how the game world is being interpreted and filtered for him because of his low charisma score, which is definitely a game mechanic that was introduced in the whole entire series. Like it actually happens to the main character in book 1. So to see like it happen here again, but it's ratcheted up to like 11, it's super funny. Like it really is. Added that a good buddy aspect, and many scenes that seem to be written just for a joke or a pun or something. And this is just kind of a gem. I actually know Dakota Crout personally. We've had a chance to talk a few times. We've done author interviews several times. And he's like, yeah, man, I wrote this whole thing for like a joke. Like there's one scene, like there's one joke where this like cover art matches, and it's just, he wrote the entire thing as like the side project, and it's super funny. It kind of incorporates a really lighthearted story that's like really funny and really bantering, and like I said, it's the funniest thing I think I've read from the author. So for me, I had a great time with it. Got a score of 8 out of 10, easy. Rexus, the side quest, the Completionist Chronicles, book number 3. Super funny. Go check it out. I don't think you really need to have read the other Chronicles, but it's going to help like fill in backstory for the main character and why he's super funny. But even if you haven't, go read it anyways. It's really quite funny. With the score, again, 8 out of 10. So highest score of the episode. Okay. Next, folks, we have our next review. Break. EvoBorne, book number 1, LitRPG Saga. EvoBorne, book number LitRPG Saga book number 1. That's a really long title that's repetitive. Written by S.M. Green. Okay, this is 230 pages. It is $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description, and it's long. The gods are dying. Magic is fading from the world, and the 9 lords of night know that only one can exist, lest they all die. To give each a chance, they form a pact, and reluctantly agree that a game will give them the best hope. A game that will be played by humans. Josh Fell is your average extreme gamer. He spends hours immersing himself in every MMORPG he can get his hands on to avoid the life he hates. When Josh receives a mysterious vanilla envelope offering him one of the 297 coveted spots to beta test the all-new, fully immersive virtual reality MMORPG EverBorne, he jumps at the chance. Joined by his childhood best friend and secret crush Olivia, he eagerly logs into EverBorne for the first and last time. The gods have used the last of their magic to create this world, and their fate is tied to the choices of their 9 chosen champions. But the rules state there can be no interference. The humans must not know the stakes that rest on the outcome. What starts as a simple beta test turns into a fight for his future and the only chance to return home he will ever get. Unknowingly chosen by the Lord of the Night, Josh must go on a death level quest to find the relics needed to win and gain him and live their way home. And the rest is like, there we go. Can they overcome the threats to face them? Can they find the relics to find before the other 8 champions beat them? Find out in the first installment of the EvoBorne Saga. Welcome to EvoBorne. There's a little bit more in there, but it's repetitive. Okay, here, this is the review portion of it. I'll be honest, from the novel description, it's not 100% clear this is actually going to be a LitRPG story. That was always my concern with having it here. It is, though. It is a LitRPG story. It's 100% LitRPG story. It is. By the 30% mark, the main character is in the game, creating his character. There's lots of RPG mechanics, including levels, items, monster descriptions, damage notifications, magic spells with costs, and a bunch of crunchy numbers. This is crunchy. It is. So that's the good news. It is LitRPG. However, for me, it was mostly unentertaining. A story that kind of drops into this like the very end because of how frustrating that end was. So for me, it doesn't get a good score, and I'll go into why in a second. First, I want to talk about the things that I actually think are good about this story, because I don't want to be totally negative about it. There are some okay to even good parts. The 5 or 6 fights in the story are mostly well written, and the use of the game mechanics is done well. There are a couple small adventures the main characters go on that are actually independently good. However, there are also a lot of flaws in the story that individually are just kind of minor annoyances, but when you take them together and they kind of build on each other, it creates, to me, this point of annoyance that for me, by the end of the story, I was ready to like, oh, and that final ending kind of pushed me over there, like, oh, I just don't like this anymore. But for most of the story, it's like, whatever. I don't really care. So it was like very ambivalent for most of the storyline. And some of that has to do with like my expectations going into the novel, that the author is kind of setting. I'm going to go into it in a second. So first of all, just talking about some of the minorly annoying things. Dialogue isn't this novel strong suit. It isn't. It's usually pretty awkwardly written, and it feels kind of artificial sometimes. The main character's backstory at the beginning doesn't endear me to the main character at all. And I get that sometimes an author will write a character that has very obvious flaws, so they have a point to grow from. In this particular instance, though, he's flawed, but he doesn't have any real redeeming qualities. He honestly comes off as an entitled, rich little jerk. So I didn't like the main character. I actually felt more empathy for the romantic interest, who is a scholarship kid who works multiple jobs to care for her grandma. I would have rather have seen her be the hero, but she isn't, so it is what it is. The most interesting game mechanics in the story there's a magical alignment system that kind of determines like what spells you can use. There's a whole like diagram in the story, like showing off like, oh, if you're here, these ones on the side are on the other side of the thing are almost impossible to learn. And everything closer to like your original like alignment magic that you choose is easier, and you have a better success rate of learning it and doing and more damage, or at least reasonable damage. That's almost entirely ignored in the story. Like there's no point in having it, to be honest, because the main character learns any kind of magic he wants to. He never fails. And so the whole system is like, oh, that was a nice idea. It's not used. So that was annoying to me as well. Also, there were just way too many info dumps in the novel, where it shows like these huge sections like, here's a game mechanic, here's a world role, or whatever the case is. And it's just like, oh, you probably could have shown a little more than told, and it would have been just fine. Also, even though you see the main character's character sheet on a regular basis, it's not formatted correctly. And that's unfortunate. That's just a technical thing that can probably be fixed in future editions. But like, you only get to see half of the character sheet because it's formatted incorrectly, where it's like it goes off page. And so you only get to see it. And that actually occurs also with some of the major quest lines, and especially one where it's like a huge reveal in the story, but you can't really read it because half of the quest notification you don't see anymore. Like you have to like tap on it and try to shift it or move it around to read the whole thing. And it's really annoying, and it kind of ruins the reveal, to be honest. So there you go. However, the biggest issue for me was that there's an issue with expectations in the novel. From the novel description, from like the very first pages of the story, where like the quest is kind of set, like the big quests were like save the gods with this game of champions with the humans and all. That feels like a very interesting plotline. It doesn't sound like it's bad. And because of that, I felt like this was going to be a plot-driven story where it's like, oh, there's actual like tension here. There's motivation for this character to go do a thing, like they're going to be chosen, or whatever. And that's kind of the expectation that I went in sort of based on the novel description. Again, like that first prologue section. However, it's not what it ends up being. Most of the story is very slice of life, in that you just follow the main character as he goes and does stuff. Whether it's him messing around in the real world with his friends, complaining about how his rich dad is too rich and his family's too rich, and he hates his dad because he put him in a private school or whatever, or in game when he's just kind of messing around trying to figure things out, and goes on quests and stuff. And none of that's necessarily bad in itself, but because of the expectation that's raised with the novel description, where I just expected to be plot driven. And as I kept reading, I kept expecting, oh, okay, it's gonna get to that quest line soon, right? It's gonna get to that main plot point. Like, nope. And as the slice of life story continues, like, oh, I was like, it felt like it was a waste of time, because I already knew from the novel description that there's a really big plot thing that's supposed to be happening, and it wasn't being advanced in the story. Even though like they're set up for like other characters coming in and companions and the romantic interest, or whatever the case is, all that's set up there. And it's a complete waste of time, but it felt very much like, oh, there's no point to this quest because it's not advancing that really big plot point that was introduced at the very beginning of the story and in the novel description. Like, as a matter of fact, that main plotline isn't actually addressed until like the halfway point of the story, and even then, it's only vaguely stated. And this isn't totally spoilery. It's in the novel description if you look at it, in that it becomes like, oh, by the way, you're not really playing a game. You're trapped in it. You were transported to an alternate reality where the fantasy role RPG system, whatever, and you have to do this quest. Or otherwise, and you can make a request if you finish it, whatever the case is, right? And then it's kind of ignored again for the rest of the story. Like there were like a few references, like, oh, let's figure out this clue or whatever, but it's mostly ignored until like the very end of the story. And at that point, it's like I've already completely, because I kept expecting for that plot line to be important to the novel, and it wasn't. It was mostly like, I would say 80% of the story, and that's very reasonable, is just completely slice of life. Like there's maybe 20% of it that you could reasonably say, oh, this is, if you're being generous, relates to that plot line. And the end of that story is just so frustrating to me, because there's a betrayal and it's completely not foreshadowed at all. It just feels like the author picked a group member at random and said, you're the bad guy. We're going to change your personality 180 degrees and you're now the bad guy. And there's a big final relation. It's like, oh, this is one wavy. This doesn't, the main character is not fulfilling his duty. He's not the impetus for resolution. And it was so annoying that it went from, I'm bored of the story now, to, I don't like this story. It kind of ruined the minimalist, like, score 5 or 6 out of 10, whatever impression that I was giving it. To like, oh no, this is just actively this. I don't like this anymore. And that's what I ended up being. And it's really because of that ending that felt super forced in so many respects. So there you go. That gets a score of 4 to 10 for me. For a break, EvoBorne, book number 1, LitRPG Saga, EvoBorne, LitRPG Saga. That's literally the title. It repeats itself twice. With the score 4 out of 10. But there you go. Okay. Last review, folks. It is Worlds Unbound, an apocalyptic LitRPG system apocalypse, book number 6, written by Tao Wong. It is 379 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here is your novel description from the author. 4 years ago, the Etherean Honor Guard arrived and threw John Lee into a portal to another world. Since then, Earth has received no word of the intrepid adventurer. Until now. Finding his way back to Earth through a portal, John returns to a very changed world. The shackles of galactic control have bound Earth and humanity even tighter to the system. Now John has to find a way to free Earth from galactic control while battling stronger, more powerful enemies, and worst of all, he would need to indulge in politics. Good things he's got a new class and new allies. So there we go. And there's some other descriptions like, oh, this has game level ups experience, etc., but that's not part of the description. Okay, this is definitely one of the more abstract entries in this series. Like, it literally starts off with the main character coming back from a time jump of like 4 years. Like at the end of book 5, book 5, the main character, this is minorly spoiled, but it's talked about in the novel description. He's pushed through a portal for his to advance his class to like master level and to get into master class. Book 6 starts with him coming back out of the portal 4 years later. So there's literally a 4-year time skip. And I understand why the author did. He actually authored at the very end of the novel. He actually just describes his thought process and why he chose to not include that whole 4-year section in it. And it kind of came down to his reasoning saying, it's an interesting section. It's essentially a whole long training section of 4 years long, and there aren't any level ups in it. So he felt like while it could have been interesting, he might do like a novel 5.5 at some point describing that section. It doesn't advance the novel, and it really only matters that the main character got his new class and he came back to Earth. The things that happen in there, while maybe interesting, don't really advance this story arc. And I'm not going to argue the guy. He's the author. It's his universe. Like, I see where he's going with that. That's what happens. So as a necessity, of course, there's a lot of like catch up that the main character has to do, and the side characters have to do as they're catching up on 4 years worth of events and history and like advancement in the world. And so that's a good part of the beginning section story. As I was already stating in the novel description, a lot of the story focuses on politics, and that is absolutely true. Some of the negative reviews in the story are basically saying, oh, I don't like politics, I'm not going to read this, or I didn't enjoy it because of the politics. For me, I'm also someone who doesn't really enjoy politics, but I still like this, and that's mostly because there's still good action, there's good dungeon crawling, there's good RPG progression that's put in the story regularly as parts of the plot and the storyline. So the author isn't ignoring action and adventure and leveling up and whatever the case is, but it definitely is not the focus anymore. That's not the whole story. A lot of the focus of the story is on the goal of like getting the main character, or getting Earth rather, a seat on the Galactic Council. And the main character and his allies trying to get the needed votes for a highly divided, populace of like aliens and humans and settlement. And there's a whole like real like complicated and really detailed like setup, like, oh, we need these different factions. We need them for some reason. It's a way to like compromise or like make out deals or destroy settlements so we can take them out for those votes. And there's a whole like, plot line for there. And that's kind of the focus. So a lot of the story is about politicking, is about, the main character with the group's talking and compromising, some political backstabbing, backroom dealing. And in general, I'm not really entertained with it, but in this case, to me, it was okay because the conversations were very interesting. They were done with aliens. So you get a little bit of a societal point of view, and you get to catch up with some other characters you actually like and enjoy. And so there's like some interpersonal like communication stuff happening there as well. And character development between characters. So while it's not my favorite book in the series, it wasn't bad for me. And if you like politics stories, you're probably gonna like this more than I did. But for me, there was still enough action, especially with the ending, that it was still an engaging story to me. So that's me. Overall, I had a good time with it. Just not as much as early ones, obviously. And you can kind of tell that the author is trying to cap in this arc in the series, because you don't do a 4-year time skip if you're going to continue on with a bunch of like really important relationships or conflicts, right? That kind of indicates that, oh, this is moving on to a different direction. And that's kind of what happens here. The story arc seems to be moving into more of a galactic level, which is also hinted at by like the cover art. So it's not a spoiler. But the author is also trying to tie up some loose ends here on this particular arc. So, and that's what happens. For me, it gets a score of 7.2 out of 10. Enjoyable. Not my favorite in the series though, but it's still really good stuff. And if you like politics, if you like that kind of stuff, you're like this a lot more. For me, there's enough action still. There's got enough RPG adventuring and combat. There's definitely some really good combat scenes here still, that made it so worth my time and is enjoyable in those aspects that I still enjoyed. And I didn't hate the politics, and I usually do. But this was interesting enough in that there's sci-fi alien sociology aspects that it was kind of tolerable for me, at least. So there you go. That's me though. And then everybody likes politics, so also letting you know that it exists. Oh, and one more thing. I read a review where a reviewer gave the author a 1-star review because for some reason he suddenly realized the main character was bisexual, and he was like, "Oh no, this is an LGBTQ like trying to money grab," and I'm like, that makes no sense to me. He's like, the reviewer is claiming, "Oh, it comes out of nowhere." I'm like, nope. This has been from the very beginning of the novel. People are leaving bad reviews because they don't like the fact the main character is bisexual. So there it is. So if you didn't know, that's a part of the story. And there's really only there's one scene where it really even comes up. There's no sex in the story. It's all, there's some inferences of one scene where it's fade to black. And then it's like a relationship kind of conversation. And that's kind of it. So it's not even a big issue in the story, which is why he or she might have missed it earlier. So there you go. But for me, enjoyable still, 7.2 out of 10. Worlds, Unbound, an Apocalypse LitRPG story. System Apocalypse, book number 6, with score 7.2 out of 10. And that's it, folks. We're done. That is the show. 7 LitRPG reviews. In the past week or so, it was enjoyable for me. Had a good time. I actually got through all the entire reading list that I wanted to. So I should be writing more, to be honest, but I had some fun stories. And that's it. So thanks for hanging out with me, folks. If you want to follow us on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook, you can find out all the ways to do so in the show notes. Of course, we have a bunch of places to find us and hang out with us, please. And you do follow us, because we'll send you reviews. We'll send you the LitRPG podcast on a regular weekly basis to be notified when it comes out, and so you can see what's good, what's not so good, and you can make your decisions based on that, obviously, or whatever you else want to do, and including just letting you know about stuff that comes out in the near future or now, or new audiobooks. Great information that we compile just for you folks, so you don't have to go through the hassle. And that's it. So thanks for hanging out with us. You want to support the podcast in any other way, shape, or form, you can find out all the ways you do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. And until we can hang out again, ladies and gentlemen, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.